How could success possibly be a bad thing? We are finally reaping the benefits of all of our hard work and getting what we rightly deserve and celebrating it. However, with all of those fantastic things come a few unexpected challenges which may not be apparent at first, especially if we haven't experienced a lot of success. It turns out a lot of the challenges that come with success are actually because of how we framed it before we had it. And one of the ways that we frame it is that we treat success sometimes as a bit of an end-all. As in, I'll finally be happy and fulfilled long-term if I just achieve X, Y, and Z. But this is a wildly high expectation. It makes sense that we'd expect us to be feeling a certain way short-term following success. But to think that we're going to be in that state long-term is actually quite a grandiose expectation. Because a lot of what we expect long-term are actually the short-term side effects of success. It's not going to take long before we start to not feel fulfilled again. And this goes for even some of the largest successes. So you may have achieved one of the greatest things in the world, but a week later, perhaps 2 weeks later, you might be feeling almost the same as before you had the success. So this expectation that we have that we're going to be fulfilled a heck of a lot more than we really are neglects the fact that the experience of it is fleeting, because our emotions are fleeting. We overpromise ourselves what success is going to bring, and then it will underdeliver. Now, there are certain passive long-term effects that we may feel, such as a heightened sense of confidence in ourselves, but not the sparkling, joyous effects that come in a more transient nature following the success. Now, what happens after the emotional spike has depleted? Well, naturally, we might want to start chasing that again, because it simply just felt so great, we want to replicate it. But this quickly turns into a bit of a hamster wheel, and it becomes less about what you're doing and more about chasing the end results, more accurately, the end emotion of what the action could bring. And if that's the case, then most of our time is going to be spent in a kind of chasing mode, where the present moment becomes neglected in pursuit of another one. And in a sense, that is wasting time, because we remove the value of the immediate moment and replace it with a fiction. We replace it with a reality which may not even exist or happen. So if that's the case, it speaks to a larger issue of being end goal centric rather than present goal centric. And these two viewpoints are essentially the drivers of motivation for why you're doing the thing in the first place. Are you doing it to feel something at the end of the goal being completed? Or are you doing it more so to gain value in this immediate moment? Now, being end goal centric is more of a phantom. We're chasing a bit of a ghost. Because as I said, what we're wanting may not even happen, and if it does, the experience is fleeting, and then soon enough we're going to be in that same state before, chasing the next one. For me, making these YouTube videos, I've already fallen into the trap of expecting what it's going to be like in the future to have X amount of success, to be able to make a living from this. But that entirely neglects this immediate moment, which is where the value really is. So this is a mindset that I am working to shift. Success challenges the idea that life is about progress and not the destination, because success in itself is a destination. It may lead us to saying, this moment's not enough, so I have to have a moment where this is happening. There's a fantastic quote from Naval Ravikant, I hope I'm saying that right. I think it's like, desire is a contract we make with ourselves to be unhappy until we get what we want. Which is kind of a mouthful, but that's essentially what this is about. It's about not throwing our moments away, substituting them for a vision of something better. When although that is useful at times, if we are in that state for long periods of time, we're going to be heavily reducing the quality of our moments. So when these little spikes of emotional release become the defining factor for our lives and not all the moments in between, then we are neglecting maybe 95% or more of the entire timeline. So our successes can be about absolutely anything. They don't have to be about some grandiose goal of money and fame. They could simply be simple successes within yourself, feeling like you've leveled up somehow. You've dropped certain difficult mindsets. You're able to handle yourself and your emotions better than before. What can happen is, before we've achieved those goals, we can overestimate what it would be like to have those goals fulfilled, which creates a letdown when it happens, because although it's great that you've achieved said goal, it's just simply not as glamorous as you pictured it. And part of the reason for that is because all of our other problems, for example, if we're talking about leveling up within ourselves mentally, all of our other problems still remain. And that almost might sound obvious, but it's like we can think that our other problems are going to be less of a problem if we just solve this problem. So we put one up on quite a high pedestal, and we say, because this is such an issue for me right now, if I solved it, everything's going to be so much better. So it's like we think solving this issue is going to cancel out everything else. That's certainly been the case for me. I don't know how much that's going to resonate. But the truth is, we're still going to be battling with all the other issues. So to think that gaining success in anything is going to make your life a huge amount better is a dangerous mindset to take, because there's always going to be problems. And there's this idea that you can verify for yourself, if you think is right, that when you solve something, when one problem goes away, another one simply comes in, and the mind almost magnifies it and has replaced an old problem with a new one. So the mind kind of shifts priority, and it goes, okay, that one's solved. Now let's bring the new one up to the table, maybe with the same amount of hardship and maybe even more than before. There's a fantastic quote from, I hope I'm saying this right, Jose Marti. Man has to suffer. When he has no real afflictions, he invents some. Which speaks to the idea that the mind will always have problems. It's simply able to create them out of thin air. And the problems that are created are going to be smaller ones, but likely will be blown up in proportion to seem bigger than they really are. So there's a strange kind of magnification that happens, no matter how objectively big or small the problems really are. There's a magnification that happens internally, which seems to make these problems so much worse than they really are, to make us bother ourselves as much as we can. And I wonder if that's even us consciously doing that. In a way, I suppose it is, but it still feels like some kind of default that the mind imposes on us, perhaps for our survival. At the end of the day, that's the mind's job. It's to have problems and to solve them to, first and foremost, increase chances of survival. So even if these problems aren't related to survival, it's almost like the mind treats them that way anyway. And the bigger it can make those problems in your head, maybe that will increase your chances of surviving. So there are reasons for it, and it brings into question how much we are consciously making our problems bigger, or if it's simply just the mind doing that, and we're not necessarily doing it, because a lot of the mind's functions are autonomous, and we often think that we are the ones generating a lot of the mind's nonsense, but this is simply not the case, because so much of the mind's processes are automatic, and we don't necessarily have a say in it short term. So on the point that having certain successes may bring more than they actually do, when we are over-glamorizing the results of our success, it's almost like we think they're going to somehow lessen our humanity. But no amount of success is going to change the fact that you're human. And that's such an important point, because if we realize that, maybe we wouldn't be over-promising ourselves how good our lives would be if we'd just achieved something. There are simply going to be struggles because you're human, and no amount of success is going to change that. So in that way, success is not an end-all. And we can avoid being disappointed when we find out that we're still human. And this is totally relevant to how we tackle our smaller daily problems as well. So as I said before, it's not just about these larger, more grandiose successes in life. It's also about the micro successes. So with all of this being said, what do we need to do? Well, this may be obvious, but it requires a mentality shift, because success is a problem of expectation. And it's so easy to fall into the trap where we are constantly over-promising and then getting under-delivered in the results that we're getting. So if we have more accurate expectations, we will no longer be over-promising ourselves in what we experience. We simply need to be more realistic about what success brings before you start chasing it. It's not an end-all, because life goes on and you're human. And there's not a lot more that needs to be said. A lot of the issues that you're dealing with right now won't change because you've achieved some amount of success. Even if those successes relate to dealing with your inner problems. For example, tackling destructive mental patterns. New problems are going to come up anyway, because life is an abundance of potential issues that could happen. And there's some quote about how life is always going to be bringing you something new to deal with and to figure out. So we shouldn't be so black and white about our successes. And when I say black and white, I mean all or nothing. If I just achieved this, all would be solved. Because your other problems will still remain, and we will always have problems. So it's almost like taking a Taoist approach, because the Taoist approach is all about taking the path of least resistance. And we give ourselves so much resistance when we think that if we just solved this and this and this and this, that we're going to be fine. We create secondary problems on top of the original problems that we're having by having this mindset that if we just figured this and this and this out, we'll be okay. Because the moment that you're okay, a new thing's going to come in. And so you're constantly going to be in a bit of a muddle. So accepting the fact that there is always going to be issues, there's always going to be things to strive for, being realistic about what they're actually going to bring. And this isn't to say don't celebrate your successes and reap all the benefits from them, but to be more realistic about how success won't affect a huge number of other things in your life that you think it will. Because at the end of the day, we're all just chasing some form of feeling content. And that comes with being okay with what's happening right now. Even if we are striving for success, we can still have a mindset which in a way takes it off a pedestal a bit, because it probably won't bring as much as we think it's going to. And just be okay with the fact that there's always going to be issues, and that's okay. Because being human means we're always going to be striving for something. We are probably going to be dissatisfied a lot of the time, and that's just how we are. It's what moves us forward and keeps us productive. Because we want to have a continued sense of purpose and meaning and whatnot. So the solution is simply to come back to reality. And it's fantastic when you've had some successes, because you know that they aren't the end-all solution that you thought they were. And I think we could get to a place where we are no longer disappointing ourselves, because we have refined our expectations.